All right, so good afternoon. We did our research on leadership on two educational leaders and one military slash political leader. And those are Wendy Cobb, Geoffrey Canada, and Adolf Hitler. And presenting today is myself, Matthew Black, Joella Glaude, Brian Henley, Nicole Hope, and Jenny Manso. So I'm going to go ahead and take it first. I'm going to just briefly discuss the background of these three leaders. So first we have Wendy Kopp. So Wendy Kopp founded Teach for America in 1989. The concept was to amass a core of trained educators from diverse backgrounds. Now, Kopp recognized that there was no style of recruitment similar to what she had seen in the private sector. So she sought to convert top talent to lend their expertise and leadership as educators and administrators to achieve the goal of providing high quality education in communities that lacked the resources that were available in more affluent areas. So another thing about Wendy Kopp, she also ended up co-founding Teach for All in 2007. And this organization replicated the successes of Teach for America. But this was a global initiative driven by more than 53 independent and local members. Next, we have Geoffrey Canada, founder of the Harlem Children's Zone. Geoffrey Canada came from humble beginnings in the South Bronx, New York. He overcame the odds, going on to graduate from Harvard University, which bookended a journey that taught him the important role that education plays in allowing one to live a productive, meaningful life. This realization brought him back to Harlem, New York, where he successfully implemented the Harlem Children's Zone, which has served the community ever since. So within this initiative, it entails a comprehensive set of programs that's aimed at ensuring the youth from these impoverished communities could be successful academically. Just another note about Geoffrey Canada. The framework for Harlem Children's Zone was adopted by President Barack Obama for Promised Neighborhoods in 2009. This was an outreach effort that's similar, and this spanned across the nation. He was also selected as the co-chair of the Commission for Economic Opportunity by former NYC Mayor Michael Bloomberg. All right, next we have Adolf Hitler. So Hitler rose quickly through the ranks of the Nazi Party in the late 1920s through the early 1930s. From the outsider's point of view, he appeared to be a passionate leader whose chief concern was getting Germany back on its feet after World War I. While this may be true, it masked his and the Nazi Party's true intentions, which was to exterminate those they felt were inferior and propel themselves into a state of world domination. Their ambitions would never be fully realized due to suffering a catastrophic defeat on all fronts in World War II. But unfortunately, before all this was said and done, more than 6 million Jewish people and millions more would suffer a terrible fate in the course of his deranged leadership. Okay, so next we have Joella, and she's going to talk a little bit about leadership styles and how they are defined, and as we use them for our project. Joella?
Thanks, Matt. My contribution is to align the leadership styles that we studied to the leadership styles and models employed by the leaders that we chose. We determined that 3 styles were exhibited through our leaders, Wendy Kopp, Geoffrey Canada, and Adolf Hitler. Adaptive leadership conceptualizes the leader not as one who solves problems for people, but rather as one who encourages others to do the problem solving. Consistent with complexity theory, adaptive leadership is about leader behaviors that encourage learning and adaptation by followers in complex situations. There's also authentic leadership, and this describes leadership that is transparent, morally grounded, and responsive to people's needs and values. Drawing from the fields of leadership, positive organizational ethics, researchers have identified 4 major components of authentic leadership. These components are self-awareness, internalized moral perspective, balanced processing, and relational transparency. The third leadership style that we determined our leaders to follow was transformational leadership, and that's concerned with the process of how certain leaders are able to inspire their followers to accomplish great things. This approach stresses that leaders need to understand and adapt to the needs and motives of their followers. Transformational leaders are recognized as change agents who are good role models, who can create and articulate a and those who empower followers to meet higher standards, who act in ways that make others want to trust them, and who give meaning to organizational life. I also would like to take a brief moment to discuss the insights I gained from studying these leaders and their styles. In creating Teach for America, Wendy Kopp changed the trajectory of many lives by empowering her core members to develop leadership skills which impacted students, schools, community advocates, and others. Geoffrey Canada, in building the Harlem's Children's Zone, took the programmatic synergy and leadership of that model, and it became replicable for education reform and poverty alleviation. There was a feature film, Waiting for Superman, released in 2010, and a book, Whatever It Takes, published in 2009, illustrating his leadership style. Finally, Hitler, his leadership style was antithetical to studied of Wendy Kopp and Geoffrey Canada. In his remarkable rise, he continued over the Nazi Party in 1925, becoming first Germany's commander-in-chief in 1941. He might not have suffered military defeat if he'd heeded his military experts. I'm pretty certain that the ways that our leaders exhibited leadership in other elements of the presentation. I now turn it over to discuss Hindsight 2020.
Thank you, Joella. Certainly hindsight is 2020. Canada has learned that over time, he needed to better leverage the team leader approach, taking into account the changing role of leaders and followers in organizations, also known as shared leadership. Kopp focused more on dimensions of transformational leaderships, such as being a social architect and augmentation, a project scope to allow for more input. She may have reached her goals more expeditiously, and the results may have been more transformative to the level in which she believes the future of education leaders at Northwestern to possess. Hitler's dynamic relationships with the inside group of influences was relying on inequalities created through the division of groups. If a leader does not intentionally keep out-group members out, and if they feel free to become members of the in-group, then inequalities are not checked and hierarchy is irrelevant. Essentially, the power presented opportunities for Hitler. In this case, he used them for evil. For further discussion of similarities and differences between these leaders, I now turn it over to my colleague, Nicole Hope.
Thank you, Brian. Charles S. Lauer, a former publisher of Modern Healthcare, once said, "Leaders don't force people to follow, they invite them on a journey." Adolf Hitler used his manipulation to get his subordinates to follow him. He used deception and other dishonest means. Propaganda was a vital part of the leadership process, since it was all about self-glorification and not what was best for the country or organization. Friedman and Friedman. On the other hand, Wendy Kopp and Geoffrey Canada invited their followers on the journey. At first, Canada felt he had to solve everything himself, and Kopp had to abandon her non-hierarchical organizational structure and have a structure that started from entry level to top management. They both learned those styles did not work. They became transformational leaders. Canada shows his transformational leadership when 1/3 of his directors grew up in his Harlem Children's Zones program, been participants, and now runs the program. He organizes good people around a mission to help kids, and he brings a lot of people together to hear ideas. Wendy Kopp pushes for constant improvement. Her transformational leadership influences past employees. For example, her husband, Richard Barth, a former employee, is now the chief recruiter for Edison Schools. Another employee, Ian Herschel, started 2 media companies since leaving Tech America. Now I'll turn it over to Jenny so she can discuss further about not all leaders are created equal.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, not all leaders are created equal. The term leader does not equate to a good or great person. There are many definitions and interpretations of what a leader is, and many do equate leader to equal good or great. While there are many great leaders, such as COP in Canada that we have discussed in this presentation, there are also those that were considered great, but in reality are evil, such as Hitler. Ultimately, what makes a leader is that we, as humans, need someone to help us get ahead, get along, and find meaning. Each of these three leaders have helped many to get ahead, get along, and find meaning. Depending on the leader's vision and style, this could be for good or for bad. COP in Canada focused on helping those in need to gain a better future. Hitler, though he thought he was doing good in creating a better future, but he didn't. He was evil. Hitler once said that if you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. Being charismatic can be interpreted differently based on leader and their vision. All three of these leaders are charismatic and passionate about their vision, but the charisma can be interpreted differently based on the underlying mission. All three leaders will leave a lasting mark on history, for better or for worse. Each of these leaders, again, will leave a mark on history. COP for taking a stance against education inequality and creating an amazing foundation to counteract that inequality. Canada for recognizing the challenges that he himself faced as a youth and becoming an advocate for inner city children to increase graduation rates. Hitler for using his skills of public speaking and to spread propaganda became a leader of the Nazi Party and taking the lives of over 5.5 million innocent Jews. So in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about each of these leaders individually so you can see their similarities and differences. So Wendy Kopp, Teach for All, she's the CEO and co-founder. Her leadership characteristics are transformational, charismatic, she has integrity, she's influential, she's passionate, and inspiring. A transformational leader is one that motivates, encourages, supports, and inspires people to do better tomorrow than they did today. Next, we have Geoffrey Canada. He's the president of Harlem Children's Zone, and his leadership characteristics, much like COP's, is transformational, inspiring, charismatic, passionate, determined, and influential. Both COP and Canada are great examples of what a transformational leadership should be. Finally, we'll talk about Adolf Hitler, leader of the Nazi Party. His leadership characteristics are authoritative and directing, inspiring, charismatic, passionate, determined, and influential. Inspiring, influential. Your initial probably no. However, Hitler was in fact inspirational to many individuals, and he and his vision inspired and captured the hearts of many of his followers. Hitler is a great example of the dark side of leadership, a toxic and a destructive side that's not often discussed. In the end of his time as leader and the defeat of the Nazi Party, Hitler left his followers worse off than when he found them. He was arrogant in his vision and abilities and showed no disregard for his actions. As you can see, the characteristics of all three leaders are similar. However, their outcomes are very different. Not all leaders are created equal. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to the questions that you have for us.